Welcome to Dr. Z PhD Interviews. This is a place where I interview interesting and inspired individuals. And actually, I have stopped doing these interviews. And then Lauren reached out to me, and when I heard Lauren's story and what Lauren has to say, I couldn't resist. So, not sure if this is going to be the final interview, but so far it just might be the final interview.
Mm.
So today's special guest that I couldn't resist to have on is Lauren Sunshine. Lauren is an amazing content creator, also has a podcast called Gender Alchemy Podcast, which I really want to get into, as well as a very, very in-depthful and fascinating YouTube content. So Lauren, welcome to the interviews.
Thanks for having me.
So excited to have you here. So why don't you share with audiences a little bit about yourself, who you are, and a little bit about your life?
Yeah, so I live in Olympia, Washington, in a magical forest, and I live in a little off-grid cabin.
Mm,
And I've moved out here to transition. So I've been transitioning for about 3 years. Um, and this was like a fresh start. Once this realization really took hold and hit me, and I built up the courage to kind of walk in this direction, um, felt like this reconnecting with nature, with the natural world, kind of like it just fit and it called to me. And um, so I've been kind of just relearning how to be myself, how to move through the world organically and naturally and authentically. And a lot of my work over the past few years has been my background's in entrepreneurship. And so I've partnered with a lot of, like, I call them heart-centered entrepreneurs, doing like marketing,
mm,
consulting, coaching with them. And because it felt like such a good fit, because I, years ago, I like, this is the path that I'm walking. These are the people that I want to emulate and learn from. And so I have for years kind of aligned with people that I just look up to. And now it feels like I'm at a point. Over the past year, I really dove into Lauren Sunshine, into giving birth to this creative baby. And I feel like there's a shifting in the tides, and like now I'm ready to really step into this role, into this next chapter of my life. And so here we are.
wow. So I had impression you were in Oregon, but I guess you are still Pacific Northwest, right? Of
Yeah,
Washington.
yeah.
So your work, I remember what struck me when you first reached out and I went on your YouTube. What first struck me is how the content you create seems to be so rooted in mythological studies, right? You have this whole, I think you have a module for individuals that they can purchase and go through, just to discover their hero journey and the path that they're on.
Mhm.
Can you share a little bit more about where did that idea come from and why it is so deeply rooted in mythology?
Yeah, that's a good question. So, well, mythology is storytelling, right? And I think that as humans, for all of time, we've always been fascinated by stories, the stories that help us to find some sort of context or clarity amidst the chaos of our experience. And so, um, the interesting thing that I've come across with stories is, depending on the story that you're telling about your situation, about yourself, about the world around you, about your challenges, it can have a profound impact in how you live your life, how you just interact with other people, how you kind of navigate challenging situations. And so I think growing up, I was existing within a very disempowering narrative myth, just a
Mm,
myth about it was a very just backwards, like it wasn't in alignment with the world, with like the natural law, the way of things. And so it I'd noticed, like through experience, how painful my life was when I was existing within a narrative that didn't serve me. And so I think that'll and over the past few years, I've been living in the forest, and I've been really communicating with my environment. So with the trees that are around me and developing a certain relationship with them. And the way that I've found that like the earth and nature communicates is it's not so like factual and like specific. It's not like this, it's more like storytelling, like it's intuitive. It like and so I think it shows up a lot in my work because for me, like the stories that I tell about myself, like that's really one of the most important ways that like I feel like a natural part of this world. Like I feel like this is the right
Mhm.
situation for me to be in. When I go through challenges, I have a certain context and I know who the person that I am, the mythology of me that is like how does Lauren engage with the so all of these different ways of telling stories with it, this is mythology and it's just really helped me. And so I think that it just shows up because that's how I live my life.
So, how does that translate to your work with transgender individuals? How does it translate to your work to helping people really find themselves in the midst of their path through storytelling?
Yeah. So, well, it's pretty easy to spot disempowering storylines. And I think that, and also something that even comes before that is recognizing that, like, oh, I do have a story that I'm telling about the world. Like even we unite a lot of times we're just like in a pattern that is kind of ingrained it or a way of thinking, a way of seeing. And we don't realize that like there is some wiggle room with that, right? Like if we see the world, if we see that we're separate from the world and that there are so many enemies out there and that, being trans, like we're extremely persecuted and it's like I can't go outside my door without. And if we have like, not that any of that is, I'm not saying that it's true or not true, I'm just, if we're have this operating system and we're unconscious of it, then it kind of just runs our lives. So when we become aware of just the the world views that we have, the stories that we're telling, and then we can do work within, because that's like up to us. Like we can shift how we choose to engage with this world. Like that's within our domain. It's not really within our power to look at the world and like we can't really change other people. We can't, it's hard to change outer
Hmm.
circumstances and situations, but the stories that we're telling, that's like within our power. So for me, like that's a super uh, important
Right.
part of coming home into our like our little power center.
So, the stories we tell ourselves are powerful because they end up shaping up a lot of our perceptions, our beliefs, the decision making that we tend to be involved in. You mentioned you mentioned something along the line that it's pretty easy to spot when somebody is in a storyline that feels disempowering. What would be some of the ways to spot for listeners who are watching it? What would be some of the ways that they can look at their own inner narrative?
Yeah.
What specific things would they be looking for to recognize they're in a story where they feel pretty powerless?
Yeah. Well, I think you said it right there, feeling powerless. So we could, if we were to simplify, we could look at two different states. So a state that is contracted and closed, fearful, anxious, and
Mhm.
then in contrast, a state that feels open and alive and creative and safe and expressive. And not that it's always so black and white, but as we are kind of feeling into a situation, as we are contemplating our life, our the people around us, our relationships, like if we can notice how like the body is such a great barometer, right? And if we can use it as an instrument for understanding, like, okay, how am I engaging with this situation? Okay, well, my body's going to tell me. So I would say that that's the simplest one. And
Mm.
you can pay attention to the thoughts that you're having. So practicing mindfulness and just becoming
Mm.
more aware of how the inner workings of your mind. and becoming more present in your body, all of that is just going to give you more resources and tools, and you're going to become more aware of like what's working and what's not.
What would you say? I'm going to put you on a spot. So, what would you say to a person that says, okay, Lauren, I am in very disempowering narrative. I recognize that I feel powerless. My situation feels very powerless. I have zero options. I have zero choices. I really want to start transition, but I have zero options available to me. I feel stuck. What do you tell to that individuals? How do you help them to shift their narrative? How do you help them to tell their story differently?
Mm, that's a good question. So people that are really at the bottom, which I've been there consistently, I think that when you're that deep in it, sometimes hearing words, possibilities, like people speaking from different perspectives, like because there can be a very a numbing, like when you're deep in depression and despair, it
Mhm.
kind of like doesn't hit in
Yeah.
that same way. It's like a foggy kind of stuff. And so
Mhm.
in those situations, I think that it's less about trying to think your way out of it, but kind of just like, well, if you're going to do something, I would practice self care and self
Mhm.
compassion. And if you can't even get yourself to do that, like, so depression is, we can see it as an enemy, and despair, we can see it as an enemy, but it's
Yeah.
also a message from our body, from our soul. It's also like a sort of like, if all of our emotions are just different uh, characters or parts of ourselves, like they also need a seat at the table. So one of the most common perspectives of someone is in that state is resisting it. And so I would
Mm.
practice with just embracing embracing like the pain of a disempowering narrative, because you're probably not at the point where you're going to make shifts, and like it's probably not going to be believable, that
Right.
it could be different. But I would just more fully embrace where you are and give your situation full attention. And in my experience, that helps to continue, like, because depression will process itself. There's like an arc to these emotions. They
Mhm.
rise and they pass away, so you have to let that arc kind of play itself out. So I
Yeah.
know it's not the best
Well,
answer, but
I think
those
it's
are tough
great.
situations.
I think it's great. I think it's a better answer than sugarcoating for people and
Yeah,
bullshitting people in the sense that just think positive thoughts or reframe the
yeah,
negative thoughts. I think what you're saying is that maybe the first step for you, because you're in such despair, is accepting that
yeah.
you are at the place, and how can you take care of yourself in a very, very small steps versus making these giant leaps.
Yeah, small wins. It's, if you can just
Mhm.
make a tiny micro improvement
Yeah.
every day, or if it's just about like surviving one day to the next, like that's also a win. And giving yourself credit where credit is due. And so like compassion is, and gentleness and nurturing, and being, in water, letting yourself
Mm.
sleep, eating correct, like all those little things are super important in those situations.
Mm. You mentioned that you yourself had your own share of challenging moments, and I know that you shared with me one of the sounded like, and I'm not sure if this was one of the most difficult points in your life, what happened to you in Oregon. And if you would like to share that, please do. And if you don't feel comfortable, please don't, because it is something very vulnerable. And if you're going to share, just warning
Mhm.
to audiences, it is touches on um, issues of safety and violence toward transgender individuals.
Yeah, so I enjoy talking about this story. It helps me to just continue to process it, because it was a big moment in my life. And so
Can I
like I
just,
said,
sorry, Lauren, can I just
no
say,
worries.
I just noticed and I love how you said, I enjoyed speaking about the story. I like how you immediately already see it as a story versus I like talking about this part of me. So it is certainly part of you, right? But by I think by calling it a story, it's almost at the same time you can create the distance that yes, it happened to me, but it's not all of me. It's a chapter in my book, but it's not the whole book.
Yeah, it's true. And when I kind of frame it that way, like, because so I could talk about the situation from so many different perspectives, each one its own story. And
Mm,
so when I choose to speak about this, I speak about it in a way that frames me as, you know, being where I want to be, like how this situation served me, as opposed to just like, being really getting into the how it's a terrible thing.
mm,
It we have this power, this narrative power. So I had moved, I like I said, I moved to the Pacific Northwest to start this new chapter in my life, to start my transition. And this was at a point when everything was like I had built a life as somebody else, and so I that life fell apart. So I was kind of like this desire to be myself and this commitment that was just leading the way. Like that's why I moved to the Pacific Northwest. I just had a feeling,
mm.
I was just like, so anyway, I show up for this beautiful cabin in the woods, and I have just my stuff in the car, and that's all I had to my name. And the person that was, I
Wow.
thought that they were gonna rent it to me. They ended up not. So then I was overnight. I didn't have like a place to stay, and so I was going through bankruptcy and divorce, and now I only had enough money to move. Basically, I had first month's rent and a deposit, so I couldn't like to go stay at Airbnbs or whatever. So I was like, okay, I'm just gonna roll with the situation. I'm gonna explore. I'm gonna stay in my car, and something's gonna work out, and I'm gonna get to where I need to go. And so 2 weeks later, I had been living in my car and just trying to make the most of it. And I had been traveling. Like at this point, I made it to the coast, the Oregon coast, and I was focused on having good days, like getting food in, getting walks in, and being in a good feeling space was really important to me. And so I was at the beach, and at this point I hadn't like I said, I just started my transition. So I was like, I didn't have anybody like telling me, oh, this is how you're supposed to do it or approach it. So I was like pretty clueless. And
Mm.
so at one point I uh, used the women's restroom at this park. I just went in to wash my hands, and then I left. And then, so unbeknownst to me, somebody had observed me going into the women's restroom, and then they were stalking me for a couple hours throughout the morning. And eventually I was making a smoothie, and this all of a sudden this gentleman is just approaching me, and he's very angry, and so he ends up attacking me. But the and I had no I was just, I had no clue what was happening or what was going. So the first punch shattered my jaw in like 7 places.
Jesus.
And then I turned to run, and he just continued. He like my hair was really long, and it was in my face, so I couldn't see anything. But he like grabbed me by my hair, and he just continued punching me, and then he was dragging me. He dragged me probably like 50 yards like across the parking lot into the grass, and I was just curled in a ball, like the fetal position, and he was just continuing to, I mean, really just beat the shit out of me. Um, and at some point it stopped because somebody heard my screams like a stranger, and so the person like ran and tackled the guy off of me. And then, from there I was rushed to the hospital, and then rushed to a different hospital, and then I had like emergency surgery, and stayed in the hospital for a week. And I had obviously major concussions. My jaw was like
My God.
so messed up. But yeah, that was, that's like the raw details of it. But it's interesting. There's a few things that come to mind. So the first is one of the most common responses that I got during that time from people that supported me, from so they look at this situation and this person, and they say, this, give this person the chair. Like, lock him up for the rest of his life. This person doesn't deserve to live. Like all these, like that's a very common, I think there's a lot of
The
charged
person who
emotion.
assaulted you. Yeah.
Yeah. And that, so if I had that perspective about this person, um, that would put me in a really, like, that would disconnect me from this world. If I'm looking at other people and I'm seeing them as enemies, and I'm seeing other and me, them and is are wrong and I'm right kind of thing. It just increases this division. So obviously there was a huge emotional process that I had to go through to reach forgiveness with this
Yeah.
person, but I couldn't get there by having this visceral, like, F this person, like like this is my brother, this is, we are, um can and it's interesting because I see, like, I moved to the Pacific Northwest with a certain list of things that I really wanted to happen. Like I wanted to get connected to community. I wanted to bridge the gap between the old me and the new me. I like needed something to kind of ground me into a new life and to expose me to like my, like I needed to learn more about myself and my strength and my resourcefulness. And so, not that I would choose this situation again, but somehow this situation actually bridged the gap between where I was and where I was trying to go. And yes, it was very traumatic and like I'm still processing it, but it opened, so like it's almost like you have to fall apart in order to be put back together kind of
Right.
thing. And it like connected me to this vision of Lauren Sunshine, of my future, of this. It like made me realize how much I care about this community, about this world, about like being a compassionate, kind person, and supporting other people who are on that journey. So it like activated some sort of like primal passion, something that I had been so wanting to be connected to for my whole life. So there, yes, there are negatives to it, and yes, but it's like there's also all these positives to it. And at the end of the day, is it was like one of the most powerful, tragedy doesn't always have to mean bad. And like, um, I don't see it as a bad situation. I just see it as a part of my development and my initiation into this next chapter of my life. So in general, that's the story.
Incredible story. I'm so, so happy that you're here. So happy that you were able to live through that horrific chapter in your book. I I can tell you right now, would not be able to cultivate forgiveness toward the person the way you did. I think that's beautiful, but I would be screaming, lock them up first. Being very honest with you. So I think it takes a very um, particular person to be able to feel the pain of what you've been through and yet look at the person who assaulted you and still have some room for kindness, some room for, what would make somebody do something like this and be so angry with the world and people in it. Now, this is a very, this is an experience that I think everybody who is watching can say that this is what we're really scared of, right? As being in a minority for trans folks in this world, it's still very, very much unsafe in a lot of parts of the world, even here in California. So when this type of experience happens, I would assume that it would put you in such a paranoid, fearful state where you're living your life looking over your shoulder and perhaps even thought, I'm not even going to move forward with my transition. Did that ever cross your mind?
In the months after, I was in a PTSD, like trauma response state. So absolutely, for while I was in like that critical healing timeline. But in general, I mean, no, not at all in terms of like the long-term healing process. Um, and obviously my heart goes out to the people who are experiencing like real danger, like it's scary to go outside, like you don't feel safe in your own home, like those are real situations. And so I I'm
Yeah.
definitely not, don't want to minimize any of those, but for me,
Mhm.
I was looking at this situation. I was like, okay, I experienced some hate or some anger, like some violence, and it's like, is that powerful enough for me to turn away from the world? Is
Mm.
that powerful? Am I going to give that situation so much power,
Mhm.
and even the
Mhm.
fear that it could happen again? Am I going to feed the negative qualities of that situation to the point that it causes me to close down? And then not only is that situation and the fear of another situation, or if somebody's never experienced violence but they have this fear of a situation, am I going to feed that to the point that not only is there that fear, but now my day-to-day life is being affected? And the long, like, am I gonna hide for the rest of my life? Am I going to close myself off from other people? Am I never, if you go through heartbreak, you know, it's like once you go through the healing process, it's like,
Mhm.
am I never gonna open my heart again? You know, and
Yeah, but this is different, right? So I agree. So on a scope, I agree. And I know that the audiences are going to say they agree too about this, right? And at the same time, I'm thinking this is different than a heartbreak and relationship not ending well, and my pet died, and I will never have another pet. This was a threat to your personal safety, right? This was, and it was, uh, it happened in such a violation. Really, it happened in such a way where it was really infringed on really your right to exist, and that's a very different type of violence to experience. And I know that you and I don't want to negate, right, for a lot of people who are truly in unsafe situations and they have to always take safety as a priority. But what advice do you have for people who are so afraid to live their lives because they fear? And again, Lauren and I want to be clear, if you're legitimately living in places where it is very deeply unsafe, safety is always priority.
yeah,
But if you're living in a life where it's relatively safe, but you're afraid because you're hearing that trans people are always subject to violence, and that becomes a paranoid fear that prevents you from going to grocery store, that's a different story.
yeah.
So share, what was the biggest lesson you learned from that you think can help the audiences?
Well, I heard two different questions. Like, what would I say to somebody who is like feeling consumed by fear and anxiety about something that could go wrong? And then also, what was like the biggest takeaway from that lesson?
Yeah, I definitely would love to hear your takeaway. So let's first let's break it down, I guess, make it simpler for the audiences. For people who, again, just to clarify, for people who are not in a legitimate safety
No.
concern, right? But definitely the safety is an issue for trans people, regardless where they're at. What do you say to them when they're so terrified to even go to grocery store?
Well, I think that the opportunity for that person is to start cultivating a sense of inner safety, feeling okay in your own world. And there is a sort of strength and resilience that you can develop over time. And there are micro situations that are not quite as intimidating as coming out to your family. Like these, there's situations that are kind of probably feel out of reach. And then there are situations that that same pattern, that underlying energetic, like uh, t- contracted, turning away, kind of like that fear gets activated. These smaller opportunities throughout the day that would be really helpful for you to start addressing them. Like, are you able to just speak your truth to a friend? Like,
Mhm.
not, it doesn't even have to be about being transgender, but like, can you say like, oh, you know, I got my feelings hurt the other day when you said that thing? Like, there are small opportunities that are
Mm,
connected to this larger project of being somebody who is comfortable in their own skin, somebody who has the inner strength to like move through the world in a way that feels truthful and authentic to them. So there's a lot of practices, including mindfulness, meditation, like embodiment practices. If you're
mhm,
doing, yoga, or if you're working with like the elements, like if you want to do different stuff with water or with fire, like being in nature, in earth, and um, there's just like all these different things where within the safety of your own home, you can just start. The main thing for me, at least, has been feeling safe inside my own body and inside my own
yeah.
mind. And when I started feeling more safe in those situations, all of a sudden I started feeling more safe in the world. So I would
Mhm.
let go of the project of like, you know, making it about the external circumstance, and I would turn around and make it about the internal situation.
I can see that. Yes, cultivating that safe haven inside of your body and inside of your mind with little steps.
Yeah.
From that horrific situation that happened to you, my question, other than, and I'll get to what's your biggest takeaway from it, but I also wanted to know, how do you not end up just jaded, hating the world, hating people, um, thinking that there's no space for you in this world, thinking that there's no way for you to exist in this world.
Yeah. Well, I've been there. I have my moments. Like, so those are real
Hmm.
perspectives that get activated, and I
Yeah.
can choose to feed them if I want. But at the same time, I've also seen incredible beauty. Like, I've also seen it as a mention of the world where it's like a kind of love that just melts the heart, and like this connection, this oneness. Like, there is, uh in addition to being pain and suffering, there's also beauty and wonder and magic. And so I guess it's, for me, it's been a matter of like, where am I going to direct my energy, my mental focus, my thought processes?
Hmm.
What emotion, how am I going to feed this situation? It's like that saying, what wolf do you feed? Like, so kind of similar to what I'm saying, but it's like, I just chose to go in the direction that feels good, and it just doesn't feel good. This contracted, I need to protect myself from the world. Like, it just doesn't feel good to me, even though there are real, tangible reasons why I could justify that kind of behavior, but still it doesn't feel good to be in that space. So then it's a matter of like, okay, well, how do I change my circumstances and just start walking in a direction where I can be more open, more free, more expressive, more creative, regardless of the reality of the world, because like, this is just the life that I really want to live. This is what brings me alive.
That's beautifully said. So, what was your biggest takeaway from that?
Yeah, the one that comes to mind. So this is such a huge situation. And I think that we all have huge situations in our life,
Mm,
things that just knock us on our ass. And in those moments, what the thing that I think allowed me to come out the other side a changed person, and changed in a good way, is that I worked with the situation as opposed to against it. So I like I didn't see this as a mistake. I didn't see
mm,
this as something that shouldn't be. I didn't see this as the thing that was going to ruin my life. Like, I didn't use this as justification for shutting down. Instead, I fully embraced the pain of it. Like,
mm.
it just destroyed me, and it brought me into this space, this dimension of like feeling so helpless and alone and afraid and like so angry and confused. But I allowed it to do that, and I continually like, where is the process leading me? So instead of turning away from all those emotions, trying to push them out, when
Mm,
instead of overfeeding them, if that makes sense, because we can get really like this pity party, like we can really, if we want to, there's a whole bunch of reasons why life sucks. But I kind of found this kind of this knife's edge with the situation where I fully embraced it,
mhm,
but then I didn't push it away and I didn't hold on to it. And the situation itself just, it arose and it passed away and it worked on me. Like I allowed the situation to change me. And we
mm,
all have challenges. And is it so like just a question that you could, an inquiry that is interesting just to see like how your mind, your body responds is like, if you look at these challenging situations, maybe it's your transgender identity, maybe it's your family or whatever, is it possible? So ask yourself, is it possible that this situation is here for me as opposed
mm,
to like against me? Like, is it possible this is the exact right situation that I need in order to learn the things that I need to learn and get to where I need to go for my individual life path? So those are interesting trains of thought to see, like, can you really go there? Can you shift your perspective in a way where you're not bypassing and you're not minimizing, but you're fully engaging with what's here and now with this like open hearted, open mind, like just embracing the situation and trusting that my life is what it's supposed to be. Like my situation is correct. And that I would say was and I had that perspective coming. So it's important to cultivate these perspectives in small situations, because then when a big situation comes, it's kind of like a test. So this big situation for me, it was a test and it was an opportunity to put these perspectives that I had been experimenting with leading up to this to the test, and just to see like I had cultivated a certain amount of strength and resilience leading into it, so that was really important. And so then I put it to the test, and then I look back and like, wow, that situation transformed me and I allowed it to, and I worked with it in a very intelligent way, and it got me to where I needed to go.
I love that, asking yourself whether is it possible that this situation is happening for me versus happening to me,
Yeah.
right? You suddenly shift from being a victim, something happening to me, to this is happening for me, and there's an opportunity for me here to grow and extrapolate things from it and to become a better person. Love
Yeah.
that. So you're also a coach, you're a
Mhm.
transition coach.
Mhm.
What is that? What exactly do you do?
Well, that's a good question. I asked myself that the same. I asked that the same question to myself. So I've been a coach for, like I said, heart-centered entrepreneurs for a long time. And so I'm transitioning my practice into like, now that Lauren Sunshine is starting to become a thing and I'm starting to gain more clarity about the community that I really want to support and engage
Mhm.
with, my energy, my creative drive is I'm trying to find ways to be of service. And for me, yes, it's being in service to the trans community, but it feels like I'm just being in service to life. And like that feels like something that I want to do for, the time being. It just feels really true for me. Like and so transition coach or like, even I don't want to box it into being a or a transition coach, because it's like there are lots of people that might not be transitioning, but they're exploring or they're wanting to become more creative, more expressive. And so there's a certain amount of, and I've worked with some really powerful coaches in my life, and I've learned how, especially so after this, I got attacked. I was able to work with like a shamanic practitioner for a
Mm,
couple of years, and she was doing these coaching sessions with me. And I realized like the power that comes with having somebody standing by your side and
mm,
experiencing with you, like feeling those emotions with you, like
yeah.
holding you, so that when you fall apart, like there's somebody creating this soft, compassionate environment and offering you like just little tidbits to kind of like help you with your process, and then somebody to hold you accountable, like the whole thing. Like I feel like I'm a coach by nature, just like that my natural perspective feels like I'm able to show up, and that's an authentic role to me. And so each person is different, each situation is different, but it's about like really being there with the person. And I'm sure that you have your clients, and it's a beautiful opportunity and like a really a true like blessing to be able to witness somebody
Mm,
else's process and what they're going, and to celebrate those victories with them, and to cry with them and all those things. So yeah, to me, that's what it means to for me, how I approach the situation. And
yeah.
I'm like open, like I'm wanting to attract more people, and I'm starting a support group here in Olympia, and we'll do like a regular group coaching type stuff. So it's like I'm in the beginning stages, because I'm transitioning from this old kind of career, but now Lauren Sunshine is taking. So I'm trying to find the situations and the things that feel good, and how can I just support the people that I love and the people that inspire me, and how can I just do my part in this world. And so that's really what Lauren Sunshine is about for
Mm.
me. It's my creative process, it's my ability, it's my uh, creative expression, and like my ability to connect with people is so important. Like I feel like myself when I'm connecting to other people who are going through similar things. And so in general, that's my response.
So if people who are watching this, if they want to connect with you, they want to have you as their coach, can they still do it?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So
Okay.
my website is
We're gonna put it
laurensunshine.com.
all underneath.
Yeah,
I'm
yeah.
gonna put all of your information underneath so people can connect. They can go look at your amazing YouTube channel. One of the things we ran out of time to touch on is the podcast that you do. Do you still do that podcast, Gender Alchemy Podcast, or is that
Yeah.
something that's now archived?
Yeah, I still do it. Yeah.
You still do it, okay. Um, it's fascinating because when you were speaking about the process and especially how you went through experience and how you allowed yourself to redefine or be redefined through that experience, you without saying that, you touched on alchemical process of transformation.
Yeah. So gender alchemy, I feel like if you're looking for a term that kind of encapsulates my approach or my project, my perspective, gender alchemy feels really good. But it's like this idea that we can work with our situation, with our challenges, and we can boil things down to like these raw uh, pieces, and we can purify these different parts of ourselves, and we can
Mm,
feel our experience fully and like the we just it turns into this like evolution of self, and this alchemical purification, and this like stepping fully into our creative power, and into our those things that we feel called to do, but we don't really know how to get there, where it's like, and this life that we're creating for ourselves, it's like, well, we have to work with what we've got. And that's what alchemy is about, is working with the raw materials of your life and purifying them down to like the most stable um, and balanced um, state that they can be in. And then um, like allowing them to transform you, and allowing this life that you're creating for yourself to kind of like emerge naturally and organically from, like, allow it to flow through you and into this world. And so yeah, I get really passionate about that. It's cool.
I can see it's like a completely different interview. I can see you got really giddy about it.
Yeah.
Great.
Yeah.
Well, I I'm so grateful that you reached out, and I'm so glad we were able to do this because your energy is incredibly grounding, and I can tell you're very passionate about what you're doing, and I can also tell that you truly has gone through big transformation, not only with what happened to you in Oregon, but just in general. And it's so important to show up and let others see that one can have very painful experiences, very painful chapters in that book. And you can still persevere and move forward. And you can still find a way. And you can still turn that experience and realize that it may have happened for you and not to you, and make the best out of it. So I'm very grateful for you to be able to share such a vulnerable and painful experience and let others see that and hear that. Thank you so, so very much. And thank you so much for taking the time to sit down and to tell your story and to share with everybody else what you do.
It's been my pleasure. I really appreciate it. Thank you for taking the time, and you're creating a safe space, and you're holding, you're, providing that container for somebody to show up and just be themselves. And that's so important. So I'm so grateful for the work that you're doing in the world. And yeah, thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you.